Chapter 24. Beaver Nuggets. Brett was still worried. Despite how confident DJ seemed to be about this almost being over, Brett knew there was still more to be concerned about. In order for this deal to work, a few more things had to fall in line perfectly. For one, Big Chuck needed to have an overwhelming love for his two remaining boys, and be willing to do anything to ensure their safety. Brett was troubled there may not be anything Big Chuck loved more than power, or wielding that power through fear. And if he didn't love his sons as much as he loved his own strength, ability, and influence, then this thing would fall apart. Brett's wife would not only end up dead, but likely tortured out of spite. He was concerned that, despite their improbable success at the club, everything hinged on the other party, in this case being Big Chuck, having normal parental feelings and tendencies. Well, there was nothing to indicate those existed as far as Brett could see. Certainly nothing he read in the brief bio on his way down. Definitely nothing Brett had seen in Big Chuck's behavior since he had been in Colorado either. Brett ran down the list of events associated with the last 32 hours. In that time, the mob boss had dispatched an entire team to kill one man because he posed a threat to his son. And not even a physical threat, just one that might be able to finger his son in a lineup. Plus, it was not even a simple team of guys. It was 20 well-armed, well-equipped mercenaries. By all accounts, they would be more at home in a battlefield in Afghanistan than traipsing through the woods looking for a witness. It was an over-the-top show of power. Then, despite DJ being surrounded in a small town that currently consisted of more FBI, sheriff deputies, and state police than actual residents, Big Chuck sent another team to try and kill the same man. Twice. This time, he even demanded the services of bought and paid-for FBI agents, at least 2 of them. If a crime lord managed to get FBI agents on his payroll, he would normally do everything he could to keep them secret. He would never risk burning them to allow them to be discovered. They could be used against him in a criminal case. Yet he did. Again, an over-the-top show of power. Brett was in no way a profiler for the FBI, but he had been to a few seminars on the subject, and he had a career of law enforcement to look back on for experience. Everything in him said this guy would never just drop his habit of making decisions out of a position of power and a show of force. There was nothing he had seen that would allow Big Chuck to suddenly abandon his habitual, heavy-handed, controlling nature and instead operate out of a position of weakness. Nothing. There was always a way to coerce certain behaviors out of a person, Brett knew, and this time was no different, but the way forward from here would require a balancing act of careful thought-out negotiation. It was indeed something that Brett had been trained for, although he had never done so with the safety of his wife's life waiting to be forfeited should he fail. He was also sure that DJ had never been in any type of negotiation with a criminal before. He had never worked an interrogation, and since DJ had something to lose here as well, Brett wasn't sure that DJ would allow him to take lead on this. That made walking this tightrope even harder. Yes, Brett was still worried. They searched the 2 twins in the back and discovered nearly $5,000 in cash between them. They then used that cash to rent a room at a Fleabag motel on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of establishment that had hourly rates. They then, making sure that no one saw them, moved the 2 into the motel room and secured them back-to-back using duct tape and zip ties they had picked up earlier when they purchased supplies. Additionally, once they secured their bargaining chips in the room and were positive they did not need Abby for anything else, they wished the young woman good luck and released her to call Brett's FBI contacts for a pickup. DJ looked at Brett and asked him, "So you ready to make the call?" Brett avoided his eye contact and said, "Well, I think we need to discuss how to move forward first." "What do you mean?" DJ seemed suddenly defensive, like he was concerned the cop in the group was going to start demanding they follow rules and guidelines. "Relax, DJ. I just think you need to follow my lead on this part," Brett reassured. "There's no lead here," DJ shot back. "We just call the dirtbag and we give him an ultimatum." "DJ, think this through," Brett reasoned. "Big Chuck is a tough guy used to demanding and getting his way. He will not simply roll over like a scared puppy and pee all over himself in fear. If we approach this wrong, he'll start killing off our family one by one until we give in to his demands." DJ was silent a moment and appeared to be considering that. After a minute, he appeared to calm. Finally, he said, "So how do you suppose we do this?" "Well, first we need to make sure to isolate him from the rest of his crew. We need to make sure that none of his guys are in the room with him. If they are, he'll never back down in front of them." "And how do you plan on doing that?" DJ asked. "Well, I've got a few ideas, but that's not the hard part. The hard part, once he's learned that it's us that has his sons, will be persuading him to not just turn around and threaten us with our own family, because that is what he will want to do. Tell us that unless we give up his sons, he'll kill them. Or worse, torture them while he streams it live on the internet and then kill them. My gut tells me that'll be his natural reaction. He'll fight fire with fire. But he'll want to go over the top with it and prove that he's far more evil than we are. After all, he would never believe an FBI agent would resort to torture and murder, even if it is his wife's life that's hanging in the balance." "Okay," DJ said. "So what's your answer for making him comply?" Brett shook his head. "Honestly, I've been thinking on that for some time, and I can only see one viable option that may persuade him into thinking that we're more brutal than he is, and therefore not the ones to be messed with. Emphasis on the word may." "I'm listening," DJ said. It was obvious he wanted to get the show on the road, and a quick look at Brett's watch showed that they didn't have much time left before DJ was supposed to make his appearance in the field not too far away. DJ had good reason to be growing impatient. Brett hastily began to lay out his plan. It would require some quick study by DJ and some ability to act out the part using improvisation. If DJ could not act the part, or if he flubbed on the facts, or if any way appeared to be not convincing in his role, then Big Chuck would surely call their bluff, and the three people they cared about most were finished. DJ seemed to listen and soak everything in, nodding in compliance. When Brett finished, DJ sat back on the bed and closed his eyes in contemplation. Finally, he spoke. "Oh, I, for one, am simply happy pulling bullets through the knees and elbows of those two." He gestured to the kidnapped sons bound in the corner, maybe yanking their fingernails out with pliers, streaming all on Big Chuck's phone until he gives up. "But maybe you're right. This guy needs to think I'm at least just as morbid and diabolical as he is. Maybe worse. All right, you convinced me. Let's make this thing happen." Brett nodded and called his boss to ask for one more under-the-table favor. They needed files and some crime scene photos. "Oh, and one other thing," Brett asked while the phone rang. "How is your Spanish, DJ? Your military file said you speak it. I'm not sure you'll need it, but it might come in handy just in case." 2 years in high school. Aced it. Cassie and me, we went on a few mission trips for our church. I was the official interpreter of the group. I'm not fluent, but I can have a conversation," DJ replied. "Good enough," Brett said. The phone stopped ringing and his boss answered on the other end. Chapter break. Perspective change. Charles Kaiser, a.k.a. Big Chuck, was not having a good week. First, his oldest son had been killed by some no-name backwoods bumpkin out on a ranch in the middle of nowhere. Mason had been the one son that had shown true potential for taking over the business one day. The other two showed absolutely no aptitude at all. Hudson and Ward occupied positions in his organization purely as figureheads, but Mason had shown a real desire to be an innovator and to lead. Now he was dead, and at the hands of some nobody, no less. It would have been one thing if one of his rivals killed him trying to advance their own competitive business. It would have still infuriated him, to be sure, but to have Mason taken from him by someone that was not even in the same line of work was hard for him to wrap his head around. To make matters worse, the same nobody had somehow, impossibly, defeated nearly half of his death squad soldiers in a 24-hour time frame, and accomplished that feat with the skill of a trained assassin. In at least 2 of the instances, the man had been unarmed and seemingly defenseless. Yet he somehow turned the tables on them, armed himself with their own weapons, and racked up an incredible body count. Charles would have sought to try and hire him and bring this guy into the fold, if the man had not killed his favorite son. Remove that detail, and Charles would have been impressed enough to pay the man top dollar. To increase both his frustration and pain even more, he received word that another faction had used this moment of weakness and distraction to make a move on him, to launch an all-out war on his businesses and interests by attacking him while he was still smarting over the loss of his son. According to the report he had been given about an hour ago by his number 2 man at Club Escape, a large team of 30 guys had assaulted the club. They killed a number of his men and kidnapped his 2 remaining boys. The report had said it was thought that they were maybe Mexican cartel. They had been wearing body armor and were shot multiple times, but still managed to all get away. There was no doubt they would try to use the twins to give up some of his holdings. They would threaten his remaining boys with torture and eventual execution if he did not give in to their wishes. He had not faced such a brazen attack for many years, but whoever they were, be they Mexican cartel or not, they would soon see why he'd obtained the reputation that he had. Once he learned who they were, he would make an example of them. Stories of Big Chuck's wrath in this instance would be told in hushed tones in seedy bars for years to come. Charles Kaiser was standing in his office, next to the large windows on one end, quietly fuming. There was simply too much going on right now. He was facing challenges on 2 fronts, plus dealing with the serious losses to his available manpower. How he dealt with these challenges would have implications that were farther reaching than just sating his own anger with the blood of his enemies. People were watching him. His own men were secretly looking on and gauging how well he dealt with these things. By now, despite his desire to keep it under wraps, most of his crew had learned about the death of Mason and the ravishing of his death squad soldiers. And if they hadn't, they soon would. That information flowing freely among his men was an open sore, and he needed to bandage it up. To do that, he had to both crush the people that challenged him to keep his men's fear intact and use careful precision in that execution in order to show his superior intellect. Both the fear of him and a respect for his calculating intelligence was what he needed everyone to see in all of this. Behind him, waiting patiently near the door, Remy stood ready to follow through on any order he was about to give. Outside of the heavy, scarred, and ancient wooden door, he had to deal with yet a third issue that had cropped up. That third issue was in the form of a person that sat waiting in the meeting room, sitting next to the shattered conference table. He certainly didn't have time, nor did he have the desire to entertain a discussion with this individual, but with the recent series of events taking place at the club, well, he might need to bring this person into the fold, and quickly. He would have ordinarily made that person disappear into a dark hole somewhere, especially making the claims he was making, and being able to apparently prove those claims according to the paperwork he carried with him. But now, he thought on the issue a bit more. Despite the fact that he had 1 son dead, and maybe even the last 2 right behind him, and despite the fact that his main establishment had been hit by a yet unnamed rival organization, the person sitting in the other room was a very important issue to be considering, now more than ever. It was not a matter that he could simply tell the young man he was just too busy at the moment and could he please come back later. He needed to make some sort of decision on him now. The most logical course of action was to isolate him and keep him silent while he figured out what to do with him. He couldn't really afford to do so in a violent and threatening way either, in case Charles decided to use him for his own goals. He must make the young man feel as if he were being protected. Certainly believable with all that was going on, and an easy reason to sell. He considered the young man's reason for coming to him to begin with. The stranger apparently had done enough research on Charles to know exactly who he was. He had to know that it was entirely possible the mafia boss would just kill him when he was presented with this information. But he came anyway, and with no upfront demands. Maybe he should just ask him what it was he wanted, let the whole thing play out. If there was something more to the young man, like he actually proved to be some sort of plant or ploy by the feds to bring him down, then he could simply bury him in the woods somewhere. Regardless, he could not make that decision now. There was just too many other things going on. Best to put him on ice somewhere until he could decide what to do with him. Remy, create lodgings for him here. Make sure he has every comfort he requires. No access to phones, though. Take his away from him. No internet either. Treat him nicely. Make him invisible to the rest of the world. And keep some guards on him. Explain it's for his own protection. Tell him that we're under attack by rivals at the moment. Tell him as soon as I can, I'll sit down with him and we'll figure this all out. And see to it that all those documents he brought with him are destroyed. You got it, boss, Remy said with his thick accent. He did not move, however, knowing more instructions were about to follow. The next thing Big Chuck needed to do was address the slaughterhouse that was Club Escape. First, he would need to reach out to his contacts in both the FBI and the local police department. He needed to have all findings brought to him first. If there was evidence pointing to who had perpetrated such an open attempt at a power grab, he needed to be informed about it first. He issued those instructions to Remy as well, who simply nodded his head in compliance. Next, he needed to see to this David character who killed his son. The man was scheduled to walk into a field nearby and wait for someone to either end his life or bring him to Big Chuck for torture. That should be happening any minute. He needed to reach out to those watching the field for an update, as he had not heard from them yet. If the man did not show, he would have his contacts in Oklahoma City and Dallas slaughter their captives and leave them on the doorsteps of the FBI. Then he would gather all he knew about both David and Agent Foster and place the largest bounty on their heads that had ever been issued, and the girl too, whoever she was, just to be safe. His phone buzzed in his suit jacket pocket. He removed it and glanced at the screen. It was a text message with an attached image. It was coming from across her special app to avoid snooping by the feds, and it was coming from an ID that was not listed in his contacts. He didn't think that was possible. His own tech guys designed the app to be inclusive. His men could dial out if necessary, but no one could dial in. He didn't like what he was seeing. He tapped on the screen to open the attachment. The image was of a decapitated man, Hispanic by his appearance. The body of the man was propped up in an ornately carved wooden chair, and he was positioned to look like he was holding his own head in his lap. The message read, "More to follow." Now, what did that mean? Were there more bodies about to drop like the one he was looking at? Was this some sort of threat? He didn't know the person he was looking at, so why should he care? Or were there more messages to come, and was this just phase one? A moment later, a second image came across, accompanied by his phone buzzing the announcement. He had his answer. This image was even more gruesome than the first. It was of two large dogs, Great Dane-sized, but some other breed he didn't recognize. They had been disemboweled, and their cavity had been stuffed with human body parts. While he could not tell if this was a man or a woman, it was very clear the dog's owner had been chopped up into small pieces and crammed inside them like candy into a piñata. While he had never seen the pictures before, they triggered something in his memory about a story he had been told, a rumor he had heard. It was more of an urban legend, really. There was no chance to think about it further as his phone buzzed a third time with yet another horrible photo. This time, there were two of them side by side, but stitched together into one picture. The one on the left revealed another Hispanic man, naked, behind the wheel of an exotic sports car. His throat had been cut, and blood had turned his entire body into a red, bloody mess. The second, on the right, was what was obviously the man's genitals, removed and turned into the car's hood ornament. Now Charles knew what these photos were from, and an odd emotion suddenly coursed through his body in an electrifying pulse. It was an emotion he had not experienced in quite a long time. It was cold fear. "Calm down," he told himself. "You do not know what these are yet. It's either a warning or a job application. With what has happened at Club Escape, it could be either. Let it play out. React not to blind emotion, but with thoughtful and reasoned purpose." A fourth photo came through. It was just as ghastly as the three before it. Then a fifth. A sixth. They kept coming one at a time until he had a dozen images of 12 grisly murders. Finally, a message flashed on the screen. "El Gran Blanco wishes a moment of your time in private. I will call in 2 minutes. With great respect, it would serve both of our interests if you were alone when I did." He stared at the screen for a moment and focused on calming his racing heart. He took a slow, measured breath and pushed all emotion into the background. Big Chuck was a notorious killer, the head of a large criminal empire who ruled with precision and an iron fist. El Gran Blanco was just a man like all the rest he had defeated. If this really was a threat of some kind, he would crush him, just like all that came before him. His heartbeat slowed to a more measured pace. He was in control once more, clear-headed and focused. He returned the phone to his jacket and turned to Remy. "Reach out to our contacts in the FBI and local PD. Have them come immediately to me with any information on who they think might be responsible for the club. Also check to see if David has shown his face yet at the rendezvous spot. For now, leave me be. I need to make a phone call." Remy nodded his head in compliance and quietly stepped out of the room. Charles turned back to the windowed wall and tried to recall everything he knew about the person that had sent him the pictures. El Gran Blanco was Spanish for the Great White. As the story went, the leader for all organized crime in Guatemala, Alfonso Portillo, somehow managed to get himself elected to become president of his country. Not only did his organization have free rein to do as it wished, but as president, he was able to utilize government-funded means to grow his influence, wealth, and power across the entire region. Additionally, he was able to bribe and embezzle his way to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars a year by engaging directly with corrupt and susceptible members of other foreign governments. Guatemala became so dangerous, and its government so nefarious, the United Nations took up the issue of dealing with him as a topic of the Security Council. Eventually, with both the United States and France taking lead by providing military support, they were able to get him removed from power and arrested. The U.S. was able to secure an order of extradition for prosecution, but before the exchange could take place, his loyal followers broke him out of jail, and he disappeared. This was a well-known piece of history, discovered by any with a simple internet search. What was not known was the story of an assassin employed by President Portillo at the height of his power. According to the legend, he had traveled to Cuba to strike up a deal with the youngest Castro brother, Raul. While there, Raul kept making sexual advances to President Portillo's beautiful wife. Alfonso became enraged. No deal was struck, and he made to leave the country in haste. Raul Castro saw him to his plane and begged forgiveness. Alfonso refused to accept the apology. Shortly before takeoff, he stood on the steps of the stairs to his jet and made a promise to the youngest brother. Because of this insult, he would leave a lasting mark on the Castro name if it was the last thing he did. President Portillo had heard of an up-and-coming assassin trying to make a name for himself. As assassins go, the bigger the reputation you have, the more money you can require for your services. This American, who went by the name Joe, was on a quest for a really big job to garner that reputation that was so profitable in his line of work. Alfonso decided to give him the shot he was looking for. The Cuban regime was supported by 12 leading generals. They went by the title of El Consuelo de Doce, or the Council of 12. The assassin snuck into Cuba, and after careful research and planning involving months of preparation, managed to murder the entire council in a single night. The killings were elaborate and gruesome, each one done in a way as to make a statement about the individual he killed. One general had 2 large prize-winning dogs he cherished more than even his wife. He was, of course, dismembered and stuffed into his hounds, as the photos Charles looked at had shown. One was known for his sexual exploits and promiscuity. His manhood had been removed and placed as a hood ornament on his Italian sports car. The assassin even had the foresight to take pictures of his accomplishment so he could prove his ability and release them out into the dark web, that shady side of the internet where criminals conducted business. Charles had never seen those photos until now. He had only heard the stories and wondered how much of it was truth versus fiction. The murder of all 12 main generals of Fidel Castro's army, done in such a brutal and horrific way, and accomplished in such a short amount of time, sent a shockwave throughout the country of Cuba. It also launched the career of the man that quickly became known in every Spanish-speaking country south of the U.S. as the Great White, named not only for the killing machine of the world's oceans, but for the fact he was a white man who had single-handedly invaded the communist country of Cuba. Where the American military had failed at the Bay of Pigs, a single American had accomplished what they could not. He brought a country to its knees in just a few hours, with surgical skill and graphic savagery. The Great White, El Gran Blanco, was now seeking to have a private word with him, and there could only be 2 reasons. 1, he had been employed by those that attacked his nightclub only a short time ago, although why he would announce his involvement confused him, unless it was to help strike fear in his heart and persuade him to give up some of his power. 2, he was aware of the attack made against Charles and was attempting to solicit business from him. The photographs texted to his phone were a calling card of sorts, a resume of accomplishments, if you will. His phone rang. A look at the screen showed it to be a video call, again, coming across his secure app and not from traditional means. He hesitated before answering. As far as he knew, No one had ever seen the face of El Gran Blanco. But then, he did not hire very many assassins, preferring to handle things himself. He was simply not well versed in the world of hired killers. He answered. The first thing he saw was both of his remaining boys bound back to back, mouths taped over, sitting in a corner of some room. A voice spoke from off camera that said, "Right now, they're both completely unharmed. Not even a bruise to show between them. It's my desire to make sure they stay this way." Right away, Charles Kaiser's blood began to boil. Gone was any lingering trace of the fear he felt only moments before. Reason was beginning to melt away as well, replaced by the darker side of him known as Big Chuck. The two were one and the same, of course, but it was more of a Jekyll and Hyde symbiosis. The Charles Kaiser side of him reasoned everything through. The Big Chuck side of him, his alter ego, was released when brutality was necessary to make a point. He had always been careful and controlling on the two personality sides of himself. He knew when the situation demanded that Big Chuck stay chained to a wall of control, and for Charles Kaiser to step in and calculate everything through. But when it was time to release the beast, Big Chuck would rampage about, creating carefully restricted mayhem before he was returned to his cage of confinement. Right now, despite Charles Kaiser's order to stay put, Big Chuck was rattling his cage and trying to break free. "What do you want?" Charles said through clenched teeth. "Simple," came the off-camera reply. The view rotated, and he was now looking into the face of a man that looked closer to being a vagrant under a bridge than the notorious assassin he was claiming to be. The man's hair was scraggly and generally unkempt. He wore a several days' growth of beard that had faced no grooming or trimming. His lip was busted, like he'd been punched, and a large blood-soaked bandage was stuck to one side of his forehead. While not physically in the room, Charles could almost smell the fact the man could use a bath. At least that's how he appeared. "You're El Gran Blanco?" snorted Charles. This guy appeared nothing like he would have imagined the famed assassin to look like. He pictured someone larger than life, not someone that looked like they just came off an all-night bender. "Why don't you get yourself cleaned up before you try to sell yourself as one of the world's foremost assassins?" The camera view rotated back around to show both of his sons again. A figure stepped into the frame, though he could only see part of the man's back and waist. Doing so partly blocked the view of his sons. The unknown man was there but a moment, and then stepped back out of the way. When he was gone, Charles could see that the man had balanced a cheap glass ashtray on top of the head of Ward. He could tell it was Ward because of the neatly trimmed blonde hair. As he watched, the end of a silenced pistol came into view and pointed right at Ward. The pistol jumped, and the all-too-familiar thwap of a silenced gun could be heard, and the ashtray splattered into flying glass shrapnel in every direction. Both sons jumped, and Ward followed that by beginning to cry. Inside Charles's own head, Big Chuck was pitching the mother of all fits. He was as violently mad as he had ever been. The doors to his cage were beginning to buckle from the strain of the vicious side of him demanding to be set free. The Charles Kaiser side of him was struggling to maintain control. He exercised the full extent of his willpower and tried to calm himself, but it was a battle he was not sure he could win. Again, the camera rotated back around to show the man who looked more like a beggar on a street corner. "Here's the deal," the man said, looking into the camera. "I treat you with respect, and you treat me with respect. If any one of us fails to extend that courtesy to the other, then the only recourse we have left is to resort to our more basic instincts. And let's face it, when we compare both of our reputations, history says that will only result in quite a lot of bloodshed." The Big Chuck side of him yelled and screamed, yanking with brutal force on the confines of Charles Kaiser's control. He wanted out. He wanted to break things. He wanted to kill, to maim. "What is it you want?" Charles asked in barely measured tones. His vision blurred from rage. His eyes tunneled to make it look like he was listening to everything in a can. He was never more furious. "Well, first I'm going to tell you a story," the man on the other hand said. "It'll explain how we got here. You will listen politely while I tell it. If you interrupt me, I kill your two boys. After I kill them, I promise that I'll be coming for you next. If you know anything about my reputation, you know I have always accomplished my goals. And without anyone to leave your business to, all you have worked for your entire life will evaporate into nothing. Your legacy will be but a brief footnote in my history. However, when I get to the end of my story, you will see that we both have something the other wants. If it all works out, a deal would be made, and we'll both get what we desire. Both of us walk away satisfied. Maybe not actually happy, but at least satisfied. If it does not work out, then you and I go to war." Charles did not break his gaze from the camera facing him. He knew the man could see him on the other end. What he wanted to do was set the phone down, punch a few holes in the wall to release some tension, and then return to the conversation. But he did know something of the other's reputation. He could not risk the other simply killing his 2 boys as soon as he set the phone down. He was going to have to kill this man, he decided. No way around that. Even though no one currently knew what was going on, and he had no one in front of him to save face from, his own personal pride required a payment of blood. Not only that, but the raging monster that was Big Chuck seethed in the background, demanding the man's flesh to feed on. "Fine," Charles replied evenly. "Tell me your story." "Good, I'm glad we're on the same page," the man proclaiming to be El Gran Blanco said. "First of all, just like you, I require a lot of things to do my job. In order to acquire those things, I have a number of pathways that I can take to get what I need. But unlike you, I require total anonymity in the way I acquire them. While your reputation revolves around a central person that people see, fear, and are made to bow down to, mine revolves around stories and legend. El Gran Blanco is a man that is shrouded in mystery and cloaked in rumor. What's real? What's not? Speculation tends to create something of a supervillain status into the minds of those that seek to hire me. This, of course, adds to my bottom line. One of the things I require are weapons. As you can imagine, I go through quite a lot of them. I can seek them out on the black market, and I do so when the need arises, but this runs the risk of exposing me. So more often than not, I just pick up used weapons from unsuspecting private citizens. It's easy to do and far less dangerous. Yesterday, I was making such a deal when the person I was trying to buy from tried to kill me and just steal my money. Now, I hate to admit this, but he caught me with my pants down. He totally had the drop on me. That's when a friend of mine, someone that did not know who I really was, tried to intervene. He unloaded a shotgun on the guy that was running the show and his 2 friends that were helping him out. In the chaos that followed, my friend was killed by your son, but I managed to escape. Suddenly, everything fell into place for Charles. All the pieces to the puzzle snapped together and coalesced into a clear picture. It answered all the questions that had been nagging Charles since his whole ordeal with his son began. How could some backwoods rancher manage to single-handedly and unarmed get the better of 20 highly trained and experienced DS soldiers? How could the same guy, again, avoid ambush by no less than 2 bought and paid for FBI agents and 2 other teams of death squad soldiers? He did so because he wasn't some simple bumbling redneck that happened to just get lucky. He was a seasoned assassin that had maybe hundreds of kills under his belt. This made the death of Mason easier to swallow. Mason had been bested by one of the top 10 assassins on planet Earth. Their separate paths of illicit operations converged in an impossibly bloody coincidence. Charles was still committed to killing this man with his bare hands, of course, but at least he could feel a bit better about the manner in which he lost his most talented son. Additionally, if there was any silver lining to this at all, it also meant he was not being attacked by another entity trying to take him down. That also meant the second-in-command at Club Escape lied to him about being attacked by 30 cartel members in body armor. As soon as he could, he would have that guy killed, although he was probably halfway to Mexico by now. The assassin on the other end continued. "You see, usually you and I could coexist with no problem, even work together from time to time. But now here we are, in a bit of a stalemate. We're at odds with one another. You've kidnapped the last 2 remaining relatives I have. Plus, my trusted associate, Agent Foster, you have his wife as well." The man leaned into the camera. "Yes, you are not the only one that has a few law enforcement people on his payroll. So here's what I'm proposing. I'll give you a couple of phone numbers to a few more associates of mine. You pass them on to your captives. They call those numbers, and my associates come and pick them up. When they're safe from harm, I'll release your last 2 remaining heirs, unbruised, unbloodied, and completely safe from harm. Then, you and we go our own separate ways. Of course, I'll have to go through all the tedious and costly efforts to come up with all new identities and backgrounds for myself and my agent here, but I guess it's the price I'll have to pay for tripping across your son and killing so many of your people. I apologize for that, but it was self-defense after all. So what do you say? It's a pretty straightforward deal, and one I'm unwilling to compromise on. We both make an exchange of prisoners, and then just walk away. Or do we simply result in doing what you and I both do best? I kill your boys, you kill my in-laws and my FBI agent's wife, and then you and I go to war and try to kill each other. The man on the other end leaned in again to make a final point. Of course, since I am only one man that can simply disappear into the wind, the advantage here is clearly in my favor. He leaned back and waited for Charles to respond. The demon that was his alter ego stomped around his brain and declared that the choice was simple. Just kill everyone. Ward and Hudson were worthless as heirs to his throne anyway. Better to let Big Chuck free, tell this guy what he could go do with himself, and let Big Chuck do what he did best. Wreak utter havoc spanning 3 states and smear the bloody remains of his enemies across the walls of his compounds like so much finger paint. He'd been shamed. He'd been violated. If his numbers were right, this one man single-handedly took out almost 50 of his men, including his favorite son. After he gave this guy a piece of his mind and made him a promise to rip out his throat with Big Chuck's teeth, the assassin would kill his last remaining sons as well. While none would show it, he was sure that many of his own people were secretly laughing behind his back. He had to show them that no matter what, he would always exact a payment of blood from any that dared to defy and humiliate him. He screamed silently at himself, "Shut up! You are not in control!" Reason was demanded here. Restraint was required. Charles Kaiser was the one that needed to be calling the shots. The raw emotion that Big Chuck existed on would only lead to mistakes and regret. Oh, to be sure, Big Chuck would be unshackled from his restraints when the appropriate time came. Charles silently vowed to his other half that he would make time for him. He would orchestrate the moment when the doors to his cage could be flung open and Big Chuck would be allowed to do as he pleased. That moment was not now. With Herculean effort, he brought the darker side of himself to heel. Slowly, purposefully, he pushed the raving monster into the background of his subconscious. Not now, he told himself. Not yet. After a long moment, his screaming, frothing alter ego quieted until he was only a droning noise in the background of his mind. Charles smiled into the camera of his phone. "Well, David, may I call you David?" "Yeah, sure, why not?" the other man said. "It'll be something else tomorrow anyway. First of all, David, let me express my sincere regret we have crossed paths in this manner. You are indeed as efficient and ruthless as the legend describes. I believe we have a deal. Pass on the phone numbers and I'll make arrangements at once. You should be hearing back from your contacts in about half an hour that everyone is safe and sound." "Perfect," the man said without breaking a stern expression. "I hope that you don't plan on breaking this deal. When my contacts pick up your captives, if they even so much as suspect this is somehow all a setup, I will pour every resource I have into erasing you and all of your accomplishments from the earth." Charles's smile deepened in response. "And you, El Gran Blanco. Please note that if we ever cross paths again, I will carve your heart out with a butter knife and dine on it for a main course." The man on the other end smiled. "Who knows? One day I may take you up on that." The phone went dead and was followed almost instantly with another text message that comprised the 2 phone numbers he was to use. He sat silently for a moment to ensure the Big Chuck side of him was still secure in his cage. Then he shouted for Remy to return. When the Caribbean man entered, Charles issued a few more orders. First, he was to contact the people holding his prisoners and release them. They were to use the 2 phone numbers he provided to arrange for someone to come pick them up. For his part, Remy did not bat an eye at the clear contradiction to Charles's previously stated goals. Remy, because of his long history with Charles Kaiser, knew his place. He simply carried out orders and ensured that others did the same. "Once you've done that," Charles continued, "find out who the top 10 hired killers are outside of the one known as El Gran Blanco. Reach out to them. Tell them I'm offering a contest. Ask them which one of them has the skills to kill or capture El Gran Blanco. Tell them that each will get $1 million just for trying. The one that manages to capture him and bring him in alive gets another $10 million for the prize. Just kill him, and you will earn $5 million for your trouble. Just kill him, and you will earn $5 million for your trouble. Tell them the contest starts in 72 hours, not 1 minute sooner. Remy nodded and disappeared through the doors to carry out his new assignment. El Gran Blanco may have won this battle, and he may have inflicted heavy losses on his empire, but winning the battle was a far cry different than winning the war. Charles Kaiser had never lost a war, not ever, and he wasn't about to now. Chapter break. Perspective change. DJ tapped the button on the phone's display to disconnect. He then forwarded the 2 numbers for Big Chuck to call for his in-laws to be picked up. When done, he looked up at Brett for approval. He got a nod and a grin from the agent as his reply. "Not bad," Agent Foster said. "There were about 100 ways that could have gone wrong. I don't want to get my hopes up too much, but it looks like you may have pulled that off." "You know," DJ responded, "I'm getting tired of the glass half-empty outlook on life you seem to have." "Hey, I'm just being a realist." "Well, there's a thin line between being a realist and being a defeatist. Tell you what," Brett said, "when we have our family back safe and sound, I'll put on a paper hat and throw a party. How does that sound?" DJ smiled. "I'll bring the cake." Brett changed the subject. "You know, you could have been a pretty good actor if you would have pursued that." "Well," DJ said, "I did manage to land a part in the school play back in high school. Macbeth." "Oh, you had a chance to play Macbeth? Even for high school, that's quite an accomplishment." "No, I said I was in the play. I didn't actually play Macbeth. I was one of the guards he killed in Act 2. I didn't even have a line, but I died beautifully," DJ exclaimed proudly. "Well, I'm glad I didn't know that in advance," Brett stated flatly. DJ smiled and checked his watch. It was just now midnight. He figured they've had maybe 30 minutes before they could expect to hear from Brett's contacts. "I don't know about you," DJ said, "but I could go for something to eat. I saw a Mexican fast food place next door. Sign says it's open 24 hours. How about I watch these 2, and you go find us a taco?" Brett nodded his approval. "I could go for a taco." DJ reached into his pocket and pulled out a 20 from the stash he had taken off the twins in the corner. Brett grabbed it and headed out the door. As soon as the door closed, he snatched up the cell phone and quickly dialed Abby. He needed to hear her voice, and the guilt he had been feeling over his attraction to her, though not at all gone, was at least beginning to fade. She answered on the first ring. "DJ, did he go for it? Did you get them back? Is it going to be okay? What did he say? I've been so worried." He laughed. "It's going to be okay. At least I think so." He agreed to the exchange, and we're waiting to hear back from Brett's friends to see if he went through with it. We'll see, but I feel good about it. "Good, that's good. I'll keep my fingers crossed." She paused for a moment, and they were both silent, trying to come up with something else to say. "This is stupid," DJ thought to himself. "I'm sitting here holding 2 men hostage with a room full of guns, and I feel like an awkward teenager trying to talk to the girl he's been secretly admiring all semester." I've been thinking," Abby broke the silence. "Will Brett be able to get us all into witness protection? Because as long as that guy's alive, we probably will never be safe if we don't have new identities." DJ nodded. "I've been thinking about that as well. Big Chuck has contacts in the FBI, so what's to think he wouldn't have contacts with that program too? However, I'm working on something to keep him from coming after any of us. For myself, I think I'm going to have to take you up on that offer to help me disappear after all this. Which means, as soon as we get word our family is safe, I'm going to have to figure out how to ditch Brett. He's going to want to bring me in, and chances are, I'm still going to jail if he does. If I felt like I had really done something wrong, I'd let him. But as far as I'm concerned, I only defended myself." I'm totally on your side with that," she said. "Speaking of which, we're holed up with Brett's friends in a hotel right now. They said they'll be moving us back to Dallas tomorrow on a private plane. But while we're here, I've been using the hotel's internet to start work on your behalf. My contact said he can set you up. How detailed of a new identity you have will dictate how much money he wants for the job. Also, well, I kind of had the guy help me steal all of your money." "What are you talking about?" DJ sat up in the bed. "Well, I couldn't see any alternative. You either go to jail or disappear. And when I talked with you about this back at the fast food place, when you wouldn't let go of my hands, well, you seemed open to the idea. I told you I would think about it. How did that remotely sound like I agreed with you? Well, you didn't really say no, and if we're going to start the process, we need to start right away before the feds froze all your bank accounts. My contact said that once they issued a court order on Monday, you'd never be able to get any of your money without their direct involvement. As it is, we couldn't steal all of it, just the money you had in the bank. He said you had some CDs and investments and stuff, but he couldn't touch any of that. Still, it's a lot of money, plenty to start a new life. You robbed my bank account? DJ asked incredulously. Well, not really robbed, sort of moved it around and hid it. My contact even did it at a discount on the hopes that you will hire him to create a new identity. He said it was easy. Wait a minute. You had some hacker friend online, someone you have never met, someone you don't even really know if you can trust, steal all of my money? First of all, Abby took on a more defensive tone, we did not steal all of it. Just, well, most of it. And it's enough to create a new life a few dozen times over. Besides, you still have all of your investments in place. Secondly, while I've never met the guy, I've known him almost 10 years. Beaver is totally trustworthy. Beaver? The guy's name is Beaver? DJ was standing now, shocked at what he was hearing. The two twins in the corner were staring at him. He pointed his pistol in their direction, lowered the phone for a moment, and shouted at them, "Don't look at me!" They quickly obeyed. He raised the phone back to his ear to hear Abby answering, "Well, actually, it's Beaver Nuggets, but he goes by Beaver to all his friends." All DJ could do was hang his head and shake it back and forth. He had been shot at over and over again. He had his shoulder dislocated. He had taken a bullet to the head, for crying out loud. He had lost a friend to a murderous son of a gangster. He had invaded the gangster's nightclub with an on-the-run FBI agent for backup. But despite all of the craziness that had recently beset him, the most incredible thing was being told by the girl he found himself falling for, that all of his money had been stolen by a hacker going by the name Beaver Nuggets. "Beaver Nuggets," he exclaimed out loud. "Are you freaking kidding me?"